Our text this morning is one that we all know. Most of us could probably tell the story without even looking at it. In fact, I was tempted just to tell the story rather than reading it. But then I realized there were subtle clues hidden in this text that we probably would overlook if I didn't read them. So I decided to read the whole story. Before I do that, though, let me give you a little bit of background, starting with a geography lesson and maybe a brief history lesson. If you were to look at a topographic map of the land of Israel, you would notice the lowlands near the Mediterranean Sea. To the east are hills and valleys that lead up to the highlands. The farmland in between is filled with lush ground for fruits and grain. On the hillsides, there are wonderful vineyards. Not too surprisingly, there were battles fought over who controlled the farmland. You see, the primary contenders were the Hebrew people who lived up in the hillsides and up in the mountain area, and the Philistines, who were seafaring people who lived near the water. Neither the Hebrews nor the Philistines could live very long without access to the crops grown in between. And rather than create a cooperative form of shared resources, they fought over the land. So many people had died doing so that a suggestion was made to avoid mass casualties and pit one warrior against another warrior in a representative battle of sorts. Now, it may be worth noting that that's not the only time in history where such a suggestion was made. This is just the one we remember the best. And maybe it makes sense and maybe it doesn't. But the Philistines make the offer after revealing their secret weapon, a giant of a man we know as Goliath. His sheer height sends shivers up the spines of any and every Hebrew warrior. No one wants to go toe-to-toe with him. They don't bring a charioteer to pit against another in a form of jousting, nor do they bring an archer. They go with their strength. And their strength is so imposing that no one considers what might be the strength of the Hebrew warriors. They only recognize they can't compete with the size of this man. Now, it may be that had they gone in a traditional battle line against line, the Hebrews wouldn't have fared any better. That kind of battle did not play to their strong suits. But the Hebrews are living in fear. No one wants to face this giant. And when we're living in fear, our judgment becomes clouded. We don't make our best decisions. Fear limits our ability to see the larger picture. And in the middle of that, a shepherd boy shows up. He's been sent to bring lunch to his brothers. His brothers are on that battle line, cowering in fear. And when David arrives and learns the reason, he looks at the situation and immediately knows what can be done. He goes to King Saul and makes an offer. As I said, we all know what happens next. He plays a version of rock, paper, scissors, in which he knows how to win because the Philistines have already revealed what they're going to play. Before I read the story, though, let's consider a couple of things. First, the unwritten rules of this warrior battle is to go toe-to-toe. David will ignore the rules. Second, the giant uses his size to intimidate people. But David sees a potential limitation created by his size. And so he takes advantage of a weakness that his size presents. I mean, he moves slowly, for example. He doesn't go towards David as much as he invites David to come towards him. And pay attention to a couple other things. because some medical experts have theorized that Goliath's size really has to do with a pituitary disorder known as acromegaly. I hope I said that right. For my doctors out there, we'll find out later. If they are right, it would affect his eyesight. If Goliath is as strong as he says he is, why does he need a shield bearer? Can't he carry that by himself? What if the real purpose of the shield bearer is to guide Goliath because he can't see very well? That might also explain why Goliath refers to the sticks that David brings rather than a slingshot. Listen closely to what takes place, rather than assuming we know this story so well. Don't let anyone lose courage because of this Philistine, David told Saul. I, your servant, will go out and fight him. You can't go out and fight this Philistine, Saul answered David. You are still a boy. But he's been a warrior since he was a boy. Your servant has kept his father's sheep, David replied to Saul. And if ever a lion or a bear came and carried off one of the flock, I would go after it, strike it, and rescue the animal from its mouth. If it turned on me, I would grab it at its jaw, strike it, and kill it. Your servant has fought both lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be just like one of them, because he has insulted the army of the living God. The Lord, David added, who rescued me from the power of both lions and bears, will rescue me from the power of this Philistine. Go, Saul replied to David, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul dressed David in his own gear, putting a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David strapped his sword on over the armor, but he couldn't walk around well because he'd never tried it before. I can't walk in this, David told Saul, because I've never tried it before. So he took them off. He then grabbed his staff and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream bed. He put them in the pocket of his shepherd's bag and, with sling in hand, went out to the Philistine. The Philistine got closer and closer to David, and his shield bearer was in front of him. When the Philistine looked David over, he sneered at David because he was just a boy, reddish-brown and good-looking. The Philistine asked David, am I some sort of dog that you come at me with sticks? And he cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said to David, and I'll feed your flesh to the wild birds and the wild animals. But David told the Philistine, you are coming against me with sword, spear, and scimitar. But I come against you in the name of the Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel's army, the one you've insulted. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will feed your dead body and the dead bodies of the entire Philistine camp to the wild birds and the wild animals. Then the whole world will know that there is a God on Israel's side. And all those gathered here will know that the Lord doesn't save by means of sword and spear. The Lord owns this war, and he will hand all of you over to us. The Philistine got up and moved closer to attack David, and David ran quickly to the front line to face him. David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. He slung it, and it hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone penetrated his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. While everyone else cowers in fear before this giant, David looks and says, God's got this. All I need to do is what I do best. It's his lack of fear that allows him to see the possibilities that exist, the possibility of using his own strengths when he faces the giant. King Saul, on the other hand, continues to respond with fear and tries to put on his armor and give David a sword. David sees those as a hindrance rather than an asset. Instead, he turns to his own strength, his speed, and his accuracy at throwing rocks. It isn't what the Philistine expected. They're used to acting like the bully, who can make others cower in fear, knowing there is no way to win a sword fight against Goliath. This triumph of David over Goliath, however, opens the eyes of the Israelites. In the words of FDR, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, because fear paralyzes us. When the Israelites see there is another possibility, if you read further on, you find that immediately they begin to run down the hill towards the Philistines and chase them all the way to the shore. It's an important lesson for us, especially when we are being invited to live with fear, especially by those who are leading us. There's a fear of violence, so we are told the only way to respond is to arm ourselves. There's a fear of losing jobs, so we are told the only way to respond is to limit the immigrants who come across our border. There's a fear of a declining economy, so we are told the only way to respond is to save our tax dollars and not spend them on the impoverished and the disabled. When we let fears run our lives, we forget the truth that God is bigger than those fears, that God is bigger than our problems, that God can indeed provide. We need to remember the words of the shepherd boy. God's got this. When fear wants to build a wall on our border, we need to remember God's got this. When fear wants to wrestle children from their parents, we need to remember God's got this. When fear wants to keep us from believing peace is possible on the Korean Peninsula, we need to remember God's got this. When fear wants to protect our economy by imposing tariffs, we need to remember God's got this. But just because God's got this doesn't mean we don't do anything. David responds because he knows God's got this. This week I came across a story that appeared 10 days ago on Facebook about a woman on a bus who stood up and defended people who may have been facing deportation. You may not agree with her, but what I sense in this story is a recognition that she knows God's got this, and therefore she can speak up. It's Tiana Smalls who tells this, and these are her words, although she uses a lot of foul language, which I'm going to skip over as I read it. Okay, story time. This is kind of long, but please read. It's about my experience last night with these Border Patrol agents. Last night, I rode the Greyhound bus from Bakersfield to Las Vegas to visit family. When we got to the California-Nevada state line, as always, there's a checkpoint. Checkpoint used to be one where we made sure you weren't carrying fruits into California because of an invasive fruit fly species. Anyway, the bus driver makes an announcement. We're being boarded by Border Patrol. Please be prepared to show your documentation. Wait, she says. What's going on? So now I'm ready to act out. I stand up and say loudly, this is a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. You don't have to show them anything. This is illegal. We are not within 100 miles of an international border, so they have no authority to ask you for anything. And since my Spanish sucks, I Google translated how to say that in Spanish and repeated myself. The lady next to me did not speak English. She looked terrified. I reassured her that I had her back. The agents got on, proceeded to announce that they are about to start asking for documentation from people. I stand up and yell, "I'm not showing you anything. I'm not driving this bus, so you have no right to ask me for anything. And the rest of you don't either." This is harassment and racial profiling. Don't show them a thing. We are not within 100 miles of a border, so they have no legal right or jurisdiction here. The agents start to look exasperated because they can see I'm willing to act a whole donkey. One of them says, "Fine, we can see that you're a citizen because of your filthy mouth." And then they just said, "Go ahead," to the bus driver, and got off. She continues, "Point is, these Border Patrol officers act like they do because they expect people to be afraid of them and just comply." The lady next to me spoke no English, but she was a very kind woman. She looked terrified when they boarded. I felt it was my duty to defend her. We do not live in Nazi Germany. No one should be asked to present papers for interstate travel. I defended her and I defended myself. We do not have to take this lying down. What those officers did was wrong and completely illegal. All it took is one loud black woman to let them know we're not with them, and they backed off. As I said, you may not agree with her political view in this point, but she recognizes that she has power and strength because God's got this. When we know God's got this, we can be bold. We can stand up to the giants. We can see more clearly, and we can find a way to make change because we are no longer in the grip of fear. I am so proud to work with our associate pastor, Bev Baumgartner, who did a similar thing at the Warren East earlier this year. It's her story, but with her permission, I'm going to tell it, because in my eyes, she serves as a role model the same way David does. This story began when someone she knew went to a movie. He's a young boy she describes as polite and considerate, the kind of young man that any parent would be proud to have. But he forgot to put a belt on that morning, so he had to keep pulling his pants up. And he bought some popcorn and he bought some pop, and as he presented his ticket to go in, security told him to pull up his pants. So he looks for a place to set down the pop and the popcorn, and at that moment, security throws him out of the building and throws his pop and his popcorn in the trash. This may be the time to tell you that this young man is black. Bev has spoken to the manager, who admits there is no posted dress code, and who says because security is provided through a contract, he cannot control what security does. At the same time, he agrees with their actions. A paying customer should be thrown out and his food and drink put in the trash because security wants to exert their authority. Bev stepped in to support a David who is facing a Goliath, knowing God's got this. It hasn't been resolved yet, but she is convinced God's got this. And because God's got this, we need not let fear keep us from acting. In fact, we must respond with a sense of confidence, because God's plans will only become reality when we act. And we act knowing God's got this. Thanks be to God. Amen.